big favor, subscribe. My name is Richard Vance, retired history teacher, Chicago-born, and sandblasted by Lake Michigan wind. I live in a small brick house near the rumble of the Green Line, where I patch sweaters, alphabetize paperbacks, and pretend the quiet means safety. I want something embarrassingly simple to be valued without begging for it, to belong without bending, to keep a little control over a life that keeps slipping to other people's plans. I'm the man who says yes too easily, who apologizes for taking up space on the sidewalk along Michigan Avenue, who believed love was the same thing as surrender. I thought my world ended with my wife's grave and the gray glass towers that watched me grieve. I didn't know it had only just been cracked open. I never imagined betrayal could wear the face of my own son. Do you know that kind of shock? The sort that hollows your chest and makes you question whether the past itself was real? For 42 years, I believed my life was ordinary but safe. A brick house near Hyde Park. A teaching career that ended with polite applause at my retirement. Evelyn beside me through every season, and Dan, our only boy, climbing toward a future we tried to pay for him. What more can a man ask for? Safety, predictability, a roof that would never cave in. That was my bargain with life, or so I thought. When Evelyn died, everything caved in at once. The house became unbearable in its silence. The kitchen chair she used to claim like a shrine that mocked me every morning. Even the smell of her lavender soap lingered, as if the walls themselves refused to let her go. I thought grief was the hardest blow. I was wrong. Her absence was only the opening act. The real collapse came the day I walked into her lawyer's office, expecting condolences, perhaps a will that divided modest savings. Instead, I was handed a revelation that cracked the ground open beneath me. Evelyn had been two women all along. The wife who hemmed my trousers, who scolded me gently for leaving dishes in the sink. That Evelyn was only half the truth. The other half was a strategist, a builder of empires, a quiet architect of a fortune worth $48 million. Can you imagine learning that your entire marriage had been lived beside a stranger who was both more powerful and more secretive than you ever guessed? I felt pride. Yes, my God. She had done all that while living under the same roof as me. But I also felt small, ignored. She had kept me in the shadows of her brilliance. Should I have known? Would you have seen the signs? Dan's reaction was nothing like mine. His eyes lit with greed before the lawyer even finished the sentence. My son, my flesh and blood, leaned forward as if the money itself had already landed in his lap. He didn't ask how his mother had done it or why she'd hidden it, or what it meant for us as a family. He asked only how quickly it could be transferred. Then he turned to me, smiling a smile I had never seen before, and said, "Dad, you can't possibly handle this. Just sign it all over to me. I'll take care of it." I said no. My voice shook, but it was no. The first true no I had given him in years, perhaps ever. And with that, his face hardened into something cruel. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply began to erase me, as if love had been a mask he no longer needed. 2 days later, I returned from buying milk to find my keys useless. The locks had been changed. From the sidewalk, I could see shadows moving inside, could hear the faint sound of the television, but the door would not open. My own son had barred me from the house where I had raised him, the house where Evelyn and I had built a life. I stood there in the November wind, groceries at my feet, my hands trembling with cold and disbelief. Tell me, what would you have done? Bang on the door? Beg? Or walk away in silence like I did, stripped of dignity, too stunned to fight? That night I slept in my car, a retired man with nowhere to go, humiliated by the very boy I had protected all my life. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I should have said no, the late-night phone calls for money, the reckless ventures I quietly covered, the arrogance I excused as ambition. Love, I had believed, meant surrender. But standing in the dark with frost on the windshield, I finally understood. Surrender only teaches people to despise you. And yet, I wasn't entirely alone. In my pocket, heavy and warm against my palm, was a brass key Evelyn had left me. She had pressed it into my hand weeks before her death, calling it sanctuary. At the time, I thought it some sentimental memento, another of her cryptic gestures. But now, locked out, exiled by my own blood, I realized she had foreseen everything. She had built something beyond our brick house, something meant to hold me when the rest of the world cast me out. Dan thought he had won. He thought his father was finished, a relic to be brushed aside. But Evelyn, my secretive, brilliant Evelyn, had already prepared the battlefield. And for the first time in decades, I felt something stirring beneath my grief, something I could almost call defiance. I sat in the car that night, engine off, cold seeping into my bones, wondering if Evelyn had known I would end up like this. An old man shivering in a driveway, betrayed by his only son. The brass key pressed into my thigh, its edges sharp through the fabric of my pocket, as if reminding me it was there, waiting. She had called it sanctuary. At the time, I laughed it off, but Evelyn never wasted words. The lawyer had given me a sealed envelope, too, one I had not yet opened. I tore it clumsily with numb fingers. Inside was a single card with a phone number and 3 words in Evelyn's handwriting. When the house is no longer yours. Well, wasn't that the moment? I dialed. My voice shook when a man answered simply, Thorne. No greeting, no explanation. Just a name like a wall. I stammered, told him who I was. There was a silence on the line so heavy I thought he'd hung up. Then, stay where you are. I'll come. Less than an hour later, a black SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac, its headlights cutting across the brick facade that had once been mine. Out stepped a man built like stone, dressed in a dark coat that seemed to drink in the night. He didn't introduce himself further, didn't offer condolences. He only opened the passenger door and said, Mr. Vance, your wife left instructions. Let's go. I hesitated. What would you have done? Trusted a stranger in the middle of the night. But what choice did I have sleep another night in that car, humiliated, while my son slept under my roof? So I climbed in. The ride stretched north, the city lights thinning into darkness, then into the frozen quiet of Wisconsin woods. My questions, where are we going? Who are you? Were met with silence, or with the same calm reply, you'll see. Hours passed. At last, we turned onto a gravel road that wound through black trees, the headlights catching frost on their branches like shards of glass. And then I saw it, a fortress. Not a house, not a cabin, but a sprawling structure of cedar and stone, rising out of the earth as if Evelyn had summoned it from the rock itself. Floodlights illuminated tall walls, steel gates, and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. My breath caught. Evelyn, my quiet, secretive Evelyn, had built this. Thorne handed me the brass key. My hand shook as I fitted into the lock of a massive oak door. It turned smoothly, as though the house had been waiting for me all along. Inside, warmth enveloped me. A fire already crackling in a stone hearth, rugs thick beneath my weary feet, the faint scent of cedar in the air. There were bookshelves stocked with volumes Evelyn knew I loved, and photographs. Our photographs framed and placed as if she herself had arranged them yesterday. On the desk lay a second letter, sealed with her handwriting. My chest tightened as I broke it open. Her words began simply, Richard, if you are reading this, then Dan has done what I feared he would. I stopped there, my throat closing. She had known. She had foreseen his betrayal, his cruelty, and she had built this sanctuary for me. Not just walls and heat and safety, but a command center. A fortress equipped with everything I would need. Files, documents, plans. For the first time in decades, I wasn't reacting, wasn't appeasing, wasn't surrendering. I was following Evelyn's path. Yes, but I was choosing to step onto it. My son thought he had exiled me. But here, in the house Evelyn had left, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Morning in sanctuary began with silence so pure it almost hurt. Not the city's restless silence, punctured by sirens or car doors, but the raw hush of forest, a hush that made every small sound, a kettle's whistle. The creak of a stair resonate like revelation. I wasn't used to it. At Hyde Park, my mornings had been routine. Evelyn's footsteps, the faint hum of the fridge, the shuffle of newspapers on the porch. Here I woke to the sound of my own breath and the steady crackle of a fire Thorne had already tended. He was always there, silent as a shadow. Black coffee in a heavy mug, a slice of rye bread left on a wooden plate. He didn't intrude with chatter. His presence was utilitarian, almost monastic. At first, I resented his efficiency. What did it mean that my wife had trusted this stranger with more of her plans than she had ever shared with me? But then again, had she? Or had she only left him as a messenger, a bridge between her world of secrets and the world I now inherited? The study became my battlefield. Evelyn had arranged it so thoroughly that I sometimes wondered if she had been preparing this room for years in secret while I was teaching Shakespeare and the Civil War to students half asleep at their desks. Files filled every drawer, each meticulously labeled: Dan, shell accounts; Brenda, personal purchases; political donations; real estate fraud. Her penmanship was steady, almost serene, as if she had gathered each piece of evidence not with anger, but with inevitability. I lingered over the photographs. Brenda, wineglass in hand, seated in a boutique where she had spent charity funds. Dan at a poker table in Vegas, debt slips tucked into his jacket pocket. A picture of his name on a loan contract Evelyn had bought out quietly, transferring the debt into her own control. She had become his silent creditor. The irony cut me deep. For years he thought he was climbing higher, that the rungs were Evelyn's, and she could have pulled them away at any time. Did she stay her hand for my sake? Did she believe I wasn't ready to face who our son had become? The first time I froze Dan's credit line, I trembled as if committing a crime. Albright had guided me through the steps, his calm legal jargon like ballast in a storm. "Mr. Vance, you have full authority," he said, sliding forms across the desk. My signature looked strange, my hand still unsteady from age and grief, yet suddenly decisive. That evening, when Thorne poured me a glass of scotch before the fire, I asked him, "Do you think Evelyn imagined I could do this?" He didn't answer directly. He rarely did. "She left you the tools," he said. "Tools are wasted unless used." The next morning, I read reports online that Dan's firm had missed payments. Anonymous sources whispered about liquidity problems. His smile on television interviews had grown tighter, his tailored suits unable to hide the strain. A flicker of satisfaction coursed through me, but it was followed by guilt, sharp and immediate. I was dismantling my son. Was this justice or vengeance? Would you have paused? Or would you, like me, have felt the weight of decades of humiliation lift, one paper at a time? Dan fought back viciously. He filed a motion questioning my competency, waving the banner of filial concern, protecting my grieving father from manipulation. I sat in a courtroom listening to strangers speculate about whether I could balance a checkbook. My hands shook in my lap, not from weakness, but from rage I had never allowed myself to express. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, citing Evelyn's airtight provisions, I saw Dan's jaw tighten in barely contained fury. Back at Sanctuary, I collapsed into Evelyn's chair by the fire. I wanted to believe I had won something that day, but instead, I felt hollow. Was justice supposed to taste so bitter? I poured myself tea and stared at the brass key on the table, remembering how she had pressed it into my palm, her fingers trembling, her eyes unreadable. She had known this was coming. She had built me a fortress because she foresaw the siege. The fortress itself mirrored my transformation. Each room seemed designed to teach me something. The study with its documents taught me vigilance. The kitchen, stocked with durable provisions and handwritten recipes from Evelyn, reminded me of care and continuity. The lower cellar, fortified and humming with generators and water reserves, whispered of resilience in crisis. I was living inside her mind, step by step. Every drawer I opened was another secret, another piece of trust she had withheld, but now, in death, bestowed. Nights were hardest. Alone in the upstairs bedroom, the cedar beams overhead like ribs of some great beast. I listened to the wind scrape against the shutters and thought of Evelyn's silence. Why hadn't she told me? Why had she borne this alone? Perhaps she believed my gentleness would only weaken her resolve. Or perhaps this thought haunted me. She hadn't trusted me enough to stand beside her until the end. And yet, every time I opened a file, I felt her hand guiding mine. Every time I confronted one of Dan's schemes, I heard her voice whispering that patience was not passivity, that quiet could be sharp as steel. Weeks passed in this rhythm. Small strikes, sharp countermoves, evenings of exhaustion by the fire. I learned to speak with Albright in firm tones, to instruct Thorne without apology. to answer Dan's accusations not with pleas, but with evidence. I was no longer the man on the porch in November, locked out of his own house. I was the man in the fortress, drawing strength from silence, wielding Evelyn's legacy like a blade. Still, there were nights I questioned it all. Was I protecting Evelyn's name or avenging my pride? Was I defending family or destroying what little remained of it? Tell me, reader, when blood turns against you, what do you owe it, mercy or justice? One night, rifling through a drawer I hadn't noticed before, I found a small leather-bound journal, Evelyn's handwriting flowing across the first page. The title she had given it chilled me, For When Richard No Longer Feels Invisible. I closed the book before reading further. My hands were trembling too much. The mere existence of those pages told me that she had not only built a fortress for my survival, she had built it for my awakening. And that awakening had only just begun. For weeks I believed I understood Evelyn's final design. A fortress to shield me, files to arm me, leverage to topple Dan's hollow empire. I mistook her intent for vengeance, for strategy. But Evelyn had always lived 3 moves deeper than anyone around her, and I, of all people, should have known better. It was late on a Wednesday when the storm outside turned the forest into a cage of white. The wind clawed at the windows. Branches cracked like gunfire, and I sat alone in the study, the fire dimming. Thorne had gone into town for supplies. Albright was tied up with auditors. For the first time in days, the house was utterly mine. I turned again to the leather journal I had hidden under a pile of papers. I had avoided it, afraid of what might lie inside. Fear is strange in old age. It doesn't roar, it whispers. Don't turn the page. Don't learn the thing you can't unlearn. But loneliness is stronger. I opened it. Her words leapt at me, clear and unflinching. Richard, there is one truth you have not yet faced. Dan is not only your son, he is also a father. He abandoned that role years ago. I could not let his cruelty destroy another life, so I did what you could not. I protected the boy. His name is Leo. I read it aloud, my voice foreign in the room. Leo, a name I had never spoken. Yet it belonged to me as much as any name I had ever known. I dropped the journal on the desk and staggered back, my legs shaking. I pressed my hand to the oak shelf for balance. Evelyn had lived with this truth, quietly, for years. She had carried the weight, shielded the boy, never asking for my help. Was I so blind that she couldn't trust me with it? Or had she known that I would have failed, that my softness, my endless excuses for Dan, would have let the boy vanish into neglect? The thought split me open. I sat by the fire until the flames died. I imagined a child growing in secret Evelyn slipping away to send money, perhaps visiting in hushed meetings I never noticed. I imagined birthdays celebrated without a father, perhaps with Evelyn's letters or gifts arriving in their stead. I imagined Dan's indifference, his cowardice, my son, my failure. Sleep was impossible. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed I stood on our old porch, the November wind cutting through me. Evelyn appeared, carrying a child under her coat, shielding him from the cold. I reached out, but she turned away, walking into the night while I stood, useless and bewildered. The next morning, Albright arrived. His face was grave, but not surprised. He must have known this day would come. There will be another witness, he said, setting a folder on the desk. Isabella Rossi. She will bring Leo. Isabella? I asked, my voice brittle. The boy's mother, he said. Evelyn ensured they would be protected. And now they will be presented. I opened the folder. A photograph lay inside. Isabella, poised, dignified, her eyes lined with fatigue but unwavering. Beside her a boy of 12, dark hair, solemn gaze. His features punched the breath out of me. Dan's eyes, my father's nose, Evelyn's quiet poise. Blood, undeniable. I pressed the photograph to my chest. Why didn't she tell me? I whispered. Albright looked at me with a compassion that cut deeper than pity. Perhaps she wanted you to find your strength first. She knew this would be your test. The hearing came the following week. The courthouse in Chicago was all glass and steel, sterile as a bank vault, but inside it pulsed with human tension. Lawyers in sharp suits, reporters with their notepads, curious onlookers murmuring. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded, my body trembling with age and anticipation. Dan entered with his entourage, sleek and confident, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. He gave me a smile across the aisle, the kind that says, "Old man, you're finished." I stared back, saying nothing. Silence was no longer weakness. It was sharpened steel. The proceedings began, the judge stern, the lawyers sparring. Dan's attorney painted me as a grieving, senile man manipulated by outsiders. My stomach churned, my palms damp. I thought, for a moment, that perhaps Dan might win after all that charm, and lies might once again carry him where truth could not. Then the bailiff opened the rear doors. "Call Isabella Rossi and her son, Leo Vance." The name boomed in the chamber. Vance. My breath caught. They entered slowly. Isabella walked tall, chin lifted, her hand resting gently on Leo's shoulder. He was slight, his suit a little too large, his shoes polished but scuffed at the edges. He glanced around, his eyes wide, uncertain, until they settled on me. That gaze, hesitant, searching, pierced me deeper than any accusation Dan had ever thrown. For the first time in months, I felt the sting of tears, unashamed. Dan's face drained of color. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, his composure cracking. He looked less like a conqueror and more like a boy caught with his hand in a stolen jar. For once, he had no smile. The judge turned to Isabella. "Ms. Rossi, please state your relationship to the plaintiff's son." Her voice was steady, each word a hammer. "I am the mother of his child, Leo Vance. He abandoned us when Leo was a baby. He has provided nothing. Evelyn Vance, God rest her, ensured we were cared for. She kept us hidden from shame." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt it in my bones. Evelyn had already written this scene, long before I knew my lines. Leo glanced at me again, longer this time. His eyes were Dan's, yes, but softer, without the arrogance. They held questions, unspoken but heavy. "Will you claim me? Will you see me? Or will you turn away?" Like he did. I wanted to leap across the room, to embrace him, to tell him that he was not alone, that the rules of the courtroom bound me. All I could do was sit straighter, meet his gaze, and let my eyes say what my mouth could not. "Yes, I see you. I will not fail you." Dan sputtered, tried to object, but his words tangled. The judge silenced him with a gavel's rap. For the first time, I saw my son not as an adversary, but as a hollow man, stripped of his illusions, confronted by the life he had discarded. When the session adjourned, reporters swarmed, flashes bursting, microphones thrust forward. Isabella shielded Leo with her arm, guiding him through the chaos. And then, only for a moment, she turned, caught my eyes, and gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, not alliance, but acknowledgement. That night, in sanctuary, I sat alone at Evelyn's desk, the journal open before me. The storm outside had quieted, the snow lying thick on the windowsills. Her words glowed in the lamplight. "Continuity, Richard. Not revenge. Not money. Continuity." I closed the book gently. Evelyn hadn't just left me wealth. She had left me an heir. Not Dan, who had squandered love and honor, but Leo, who had arrived at last, carrying the possibility of renewal. Tell me, what is true inheritance? Is it gold, deeds, houses? Or is it the chance to set right what was broken? To reach across a chasm of silence and say, "You belong. You are ours. You are mine." That night, for the first time since Evelyn's death, I didn't dream of absence. I dreamed of a boy's steady eyes and of a future Evelyn had already carved from stone. The morning after the hearing, I walked through sanctuary as though the rooms had shifted overnight. The stone walls felt lighter, the silence less oppressive, as if Evelyn herself had exhaled at last. I traced my hand along the cedar beams, the wood warm from the fire's reach, and thought of Leo's eyes meeting mine across that courtroom. Not an accusation, not yet trust, but the beginning of something unspoken. In the kitchen, I found one of Evelyn's notes tucked inside a recipe book. She had written it in her looping script. "Richard, there will come a time when love will arrive in a form you least expect. Do not hesitate. Claim it." I sat at the table, the smell of cedar smoke around me, and read that line again and again. She had written it for this moment, hadn't she? She had written it for Leo. That afternoon, Isabella returned with him. Snow clung to their boots as they stepped inside. Brushing it off awkward, Dawn disappeared to the far wing, giving us space. Isabella carried herself with grace, but her eyes flicked constantly to Leo, always measuring his safety, always scanning for threats invisible to me. She had lived too long in a world where protection was not guaranteed. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling. Leo perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands folded tight in his lap, glancing around the room like he was in a museum. His eyes landed on a photograph of Evelyn and me, younger, standing in front of our old house on 53rd Street. "That's her," he whispered. "She looks kind." "She was," I said, my voice breaking. "But don't mistake her kindness for weakness. She built all of this." He looked at me, startled. "Grandma built this place?" "Yes. Every plan, every stone, every file in the study. She built it for." The boy frowned. "Why would she do that for me? She didn't even know me." Isabella's hand tightened on his shoulder. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "She knew enough. She knew you were family. She knew you were worth protecting, even if your father couldn't see it." Leo's lips parted, as if he wanted to speak but wasn't sure which words were safe. Finally, he asked, "Do you hate him?" "My dad?" The question struck like lightning. I should have lied, softened it, but he deserved truth. "I don't hate him," I said slowly. "I grieve him. There's a difference. Hate means I want to destroy him. Grief means I wanted more for him, and he chose less. Do you understand?" Leo stared into the fire, nodding faintly. "Yeah, I think so." Isabella studied me with a guarded expression, then leaned back. "You speak plainly. That's good. He needs plain truth. He's had enough of lies." We ate dinner together, that evening's simple stew Evelyn had written into one of her recipe cards. Isabella chopped vegetables while I stirred the pot. And for a brief moment, the kitchen felt alive again, the way it used to when Evelyn hummed while cooking. Leo sat at the counter, sketching on a scrap of paper. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He shrugged, sliding the paper toward me. It was a rough sketch of the fortress, blocky but recognizable, the walls exaggerated, the gates towering. But in the center he had drawn something unexpected, a tree, tall and full, its branches stretching out beyond the walls. "That wasn't there," I said softly. He looked up, almost shy. "I thought maybe it should be. A fortress is good, but you can't live without trees, without roots." Isabella smiled faintly, pride flickering in her eyes. I felt something tighten in my chest, an illumination not of Evelyn's making, but Leo's. The boy wasn't just surviving his father's abandonment. He was imagining something new. After dinner, Isabella lingered in the kitchen while Leo wandered upstairs to explore. She set her glass of water down with a quiet sigh. "He's curious about you. He's cautious, but curious. Don't push too fast. He needs to see that you won't vanish." "I won't," I said firmly. "Not again." Her eyes softened, but her voice remained sharp. "Good, because if you hurt him, if you falter, he'll never forgive another man walking away." I nodded, swallowing hard. Evelyn told me once that silence can be a kind of betrayal. I've lived my life being silent, but not with him. Not anymore. Upstairs, Leo called out, his voice echoing down the cedar stairwell. "Grandpa, can I show you something?" The word grandpa froze me. It was awkward on his tongue, uncertain, but it was there. I climbed the stairs, my knees protesting. He stood in the study, holding Evelyn's leather journal. "She wrote about me," he said quietly, his fingers brushing the page. "She said I was the future." I stepped closer, my throat tight. "Yes, Leo, you are." He looked up at me then, his eyes steady. "So what does that make you?" The question was innocent, but it cut to the bone. What did it make me? Not a king, not a conqueror, not a victim of my son's greed. I realized, in that moment, what Evelyn had been shaping all along. "It makes me your guide," I whispered, "your guardian. And maybe, if you'll let me, your friend." Leo smiled faintly, a boy's smile, fleeting but real. And in that smile, I saw Evelyn's victory, not in the collapse of Dan's empire, but in this quiet inheritance of love. That night after they left, I returned to the deck. The air was sharp, the sky clear, stars pricking the darkness like promises. The forest stretched endless before me. Evelyn's voice seemed to rise from the silence. "Not revenge, Richard. Not wealth. Continuity. And for the first time, I understood. Her inheritance wasn't the millions. It wasn't even sanctuary itself. It was this boy, this chance, this fragile thread of renewal. Isn't that the deepest kind of illumination, to realize that your life, which you thought was winding down into irrelevance, is instead opening into its truest purpose? I closed my eyes, the cold air filling my lungs, and whispered into the night, "I see him, Evelyn. I see him, and I will not fail." The courthouse smelled of paper and stale coffee. That bureaucratic odor of lives sorted into folders. But beneath it, there was another scent, harder to name, the sharpness of fear. Not mine, his. Dan sat at the defense table, thinner than I remembered, his suit loose, his once boyish face hollowed by sleepless nights. He still tried for the old charm, the practiced smile, the glint of entitlement in his eyes. But it was a performance no one believed anymore. The judge entered, gavel striking. Lawyers shuffled. Reporters leaned forward. My pulse thudded in my temples. I clasped my hands together, forcing myself to breathe slowly, as Evelyn once taught me. Patience is a form of strength, Richard. And then came the words. The claims brought forth by Mr. Daniel Vance are hereby dismissed with prejudice. With prejudice. Irrevocable. Final. The room shifted. Dan's shoulders sagged as though invisible strings had been cut. His lawyers whispered frantically, but he was beyond strategy now. His empire, already cracking, collapsed in that instant. I wanted to feel triumph, but all I felt was release, a rope finally snapping after years of pulling tight around my throat. I glanced at him. For the first time, I did not see the boy I once carried on my shoulders, nor the man who had sneered at my weakness. I saw only a hollow figure, consumed by his own hunger, and I pitied him. Isn't that the cruelest fate for a man who always demanded respect to inspire only pity? When the session ended, Isabella and Leo walked beside me. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Vance, do you have a statement? Mr. Vance, what will happen to your son's assets? Mr. Vance, how do you respond to allegations of family betrayal?" I stopped on the courthouse steps, the winter sun pale above us. For a moment, I considered silence my old refuge. But Evelyn's voice pressed against my ear. "Use it. Speak. My wife's legacy," I said slowly, so every word cut through the din, "was not money. It was foresight." She understood what mattered most. Continuity. Today is not about punishment. It is about family. My task is simple: to honor her vision and protect what she valued most. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. But Leo's small hand found mine, tightening with surprising strength. That was all the statement I needed. We returned to Sanctuary by nightfall. The drive north was long, the snow heavy on the roads, but inside the SUV, the silence was almost warm. Leo leaned against the window, watching the dark trees pass. Isabella sat beside him, her posture straight, her eyes closed in exhaustion. I kept stealing glances at the boy, at the soft rhythm of his breath. At the fortress, the gates opened with their familiar groan. The lights spilled across the snow, golden against the black forest. Leo's eyes widened. "It really looks like a castle," he murmured. "It is," I said. "Your grandmother built it for you, though she never told you. Or me." Inside, the fire was already lit, Thorne waiting as if he had anticipated our arrival to the minute. Isabella guided Leo upstairs to settle in one of the guest rooms. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Evelyn used to sit. I half expected her to appear, to scold me for leaving the back door drafty. Instead, I found one of her notes taped inside the cupboard. "Richard, don't forget the cinnamon. He'll like it sweeter than you do." I touched the paper with trembling fingers. She had even anticipated this Leo at my table, Leo tasting her recipes through me. The days that followed were strange, tender. I watched Leo explore the study, tracing Evelyn's handwriting on the file labels. He asked endless questions. Did she really write all this? Did she know about my drawings? Why did she pick this wood for the walls? His curiosity filled the house with a music I hadn't heard since Dan was small. One afternoon, he came to me carrying an old chessboard Evelyn had left on a shelf. "Grandpa, do you play?" I hadn't touched the game in years. "I used to. Will you teach me?" We sat at the kitchen table, the pieces worn smooth by time. His fingers moved hesitantly, then with growing confidence. I remembered teaching Dan the same game decades ago, how quickly he had grown impatient, knocking the board over when he lost. Leo, though, studied each move, his brow furrowed, his patience uncanny. Evelyn's patience. "Why do you smile like that?" he asked, looking up. "Because," I said softly, "you play like your grandmother." At night, after Leo had gone to bed, Isabella and I sat by the fire. She spoke of years raising him alone, the job she had taken, the nights she had prayed for stability. Evelyn's name surfaced again, and again, always with reverence, as if she had been a guardian angel rather than a mother-in-law she had barely known. "She believed in him," Isabella said, "and in you. She told me once that patience was your greatest strength, though you didn't know it." I think she was right. I closed my eyes, tears pricking. For decades, I had thought of my silence as cowardice, but Evelyn had seen it differently. She had trusted that one day it would transform into something else resolve, and so it had. Weeks later, when spring broke through the snow, Leo and I walked the perimeter of the fortress. The walls glistened with thawing ice, the forest alive with birdsong. He carried the stick he had carved into a walking staff, striking the ground with each step. "Grandpa," he asked suddenly, "what happens to my dad now?" The question stopped me cold. I looked at him, his eyes steady, waiting. He deserved the truth. He will have to live with what he's done. That's a harder punishment than anything a court can give. "Do you still love him?" My throat tightened. "Yes, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes love means letting someone face the weight of their choices." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a lesson larger than his years. "Then maybe I'll be different." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are." That night, as dusk settled, I sat alone at Evelyn's desk and opened her journal. My pen scratched across the page, the ink uneven from my trembling hand, but the words clear. I am no longer invisible. My weakness was silence, but silence has become voice. My inheritance is not money, not stone, but continuity, flesh, blood, and memory. Evelyn, I see now what you built, and I promise you, I will not fail him. I closed the book, set it on the shelf, and stepped onto the deck. The air smelled of thawing earth, of beginnings. Leo's laughter floated from inside, Isabella's voice following gently. For the first time in my long life, I felt not forgotten, not diminished, but necessary, renewed. And as the stars blinked awake over the Wisconsin woods, I whispered into the night, "We did it, Evelyn. He is safe, and so am I. Thank you for staying with me, for listening this far. Your attention is a rare and precious gift. These minutes you've spent here mean the world. And if this story meant something to you, if it touched your heart in some way, and you feel it might stay with you, then please do this for me. Like this video and share it with someone you love. Every like is more than a number. It's a silent nod, and I felt that too. And every share is more than a click. It's reaching out. It's telling someone special. This made me think of you, because in the end, it's stories that connect us to each other. And it's with you that I want to keep building this journey. Until next time.